What is I asked Cameron this question earlier, and I'm curious your thoughts as we find ourselves in the waning days of the General Assembly, not the special session, because I think that's an easy out for you, but in the General Assembly, what would you suggest are the most important things that you've taken up outside of the budget, of course? I mean, that's still to come, but what comes to mind when you think of the important matters that have been taken up by the General Assembly this session?
A couple of things, because one, we always start with those first 8 words of the Declaration of Rights, that all power is inherent in the people. And one of the things that we do every General Assembly is to make sure that we're advancing the rights of the people. So when you look at individual rights, one of the things that we've done is we have focused on victims' rights with a constitutional amendment that's going to be before the people in 2028. We've also focused on bail reform by way of a constitutional amendment that is going to allow courts to keep dangerous folks off of the streets. And we have also begun to address, in some ways, the crisis of illegal immigration that we have. And right now, the principal bill that is moving through, HB 793, is behind the budget, but we're expecting it to come out so that we can begin to address immigration.
I mean, I think this bill is more than a show pony. I mean, some might try to characterize it that way, but I think it's a very important step toward asking the Supreme Court of the United States to readdress what burden a state, any state, should bear in terms of funding the education of children of individuals who came to the country illegally.
Sure. And you're referring, obviously, to the U.S. Supreme Court's decision in Plyler versus Doe from 1982, which was a very close 5-4 decision with Justice Brennan writing the majority, Chief Justice Berger, writing the dissent. And the Supreme Court held, strangely, in that case, that under the Equal Protection Clause, any person in the world could come into the United States illegally, and that person had the right to enroll his children in any one of our public schools. That case dealt with Texas, but the ruling applied to all 50 states. And I think your listeners will recognize immediately that makes no sense. How is it that our Equal Protection Clause in the 14th Amendment could possibly be interpreted to say that anybody who's in the country illegally has a right to put their kids for free into our public schools? And that's what this bill is designed to address, to have the Supreme Court revisit that issue so we get the law right.
And, obviously, and this is where our friends on the political left, this is where they live and breathe in emotion, not necessarily in thought, rational, reasoned argument, but it's an easily vilified issue in as much as they like to suggest that those of you in the majority on the right don't care about kids or don't care about, I don't know of any of you that don't genuinely care about these young people that find themselves in the United States of America through no fault of their own. But the fact of the matter remains that the Tennessee taxpayer are bearing the burden on this, and most in the state of Tennessee, at least most that I speak with, do not believe that should be so.
And I would have to agree with them. The fact of the matter is that all of us want every child to be educated. I think any enlightened person would agree with that. But we have to have a legal system that places emphasis on the correct interpretation of our laws. So we love children, but we also love the rule of law. And we need to get the case law correct so that states can begin to address this issue of illegal immigrant children in schools on a state-by-state basis. And right now, our schools in our states have no opportunity whatsoever because of that Plyler versus Doe decision, even to address the issue. The Supreme Court has completely occupied the field and has said, you can do nothing. And that's what we're trying to overturn.
Representative Gino Bulso in studio with us, talking about matters in front of the General Assembly. And anytime I have you on, anytime I announce that I'm having you on, I get several comments from our super text line asking me to ask you about your flag legislation. We've talked about it on several occasions. I know you carried it last year, and you carried it again this year. I don't think the House is at issue in terms of its passage, but I don't want to presume anything. Walk me through where we are.
I think you're right. The bill you're referring to carries the number right now, HB 304. And just to summarize, in the last General Assembly that we had, the 113th, we actually passed the flag bill through the House, and it got to the floor of the Senate on the very last day of the session and received a favorable vote of 13-6. But you need 17 of the Senate to have a constitutional majority, so we were 4 votes short. And so we refiled the bill in this 114th General Assembly, and it effectively just seeks to remove political flags from schools and also now from public roadways and public courthouses and other buildings. And we do have the votes in the House to pass it, but I didn't actually advance the bill this year because I was not convinced that we could actually get to the number 17 in the Senate this year. But the bill is very much alive, and it will be beginning to advance next year in January in the second year of the 114th General Assembly.
How much, I mean, it occurs to me, to peel back the curtain, how much are you able to talk with your colleagues over in the other body? And if you find that something is being received favorably in the House, what's the process by which you potentially can communicate with members of the Senate and try to, I assume there's a sponsor in the Senate, obviously, but, how much more could you, in an impassioned fashion, offer your thoughts on why you think it's so important to get this thing passed? I mean, it just occurs to me that I've never asked that question regarding the relationship between the House and the Senate.
Well, we're limited in some respects because we do have the Senate sponsor, in this case, Senator Joey Hensley, who also sponsored the bill for us in the 113th General Assembly. And I speak with my Senate colleagues every day because, we are carrying bills in the House that they're the principal sponsors of in the Senate and vice versa. But we do not go into each other's chambers and advocate bills in committee. We do that sort of behind closed doors. Mm-hmm. But we do respect the fact that we do have two separate houses and deliberations are going to be different. And so there's a certain level of influence I can have in the House that, and the other House members have, that we do not have in the Senate. We do have to rely upon our Senate sponsors and their ability to persuade their colleagues to come along and vote in favor of a particular bill.
I guess the message would be for those who are in favor of your flag legislation, call your senator and let them know.
By all means, absolutely.
Yeah. All right, I think we might disagree on this, but that's okay. I mean, I'm interested in your thought process behind it. I think that earlier in the week you voted against what I've called the primary bill. It would, if I understand it correctly, it was Lee Reeves carried it in the House. It passed. I believe it got 60 votes. A number of Republicans didn't like the idea of this legislation. What it would do, if I'm understanding properly, if you are currently under a primary system, you'd be required to stay under a primary system. If you're under a caucus system locally, you can stay on the caucus system unless you choose to ever go to a primary system, and then you have to stay with the primary system. You voted against the legislation. Talk to me about why.
I did because, in my view, it's constitutionally suspect. I mean, I like the idea of having primaries versus caucuses or conventions. I think virtually everybody in the House does. But the problem is that the bill did not close our primaries. And so it set up a system where local parties, state parties are required to use a primary, yet it's an open primary, and they have no ability, as a practical matter, to prevent Democrats from voting in the Republican primary and vice versa. And the reason that's a constitutional problem is that we've got this thing called a right of freedom of association under the First Amendment. And we've had several cases. The most famous one, I think, was California Democratic Party versus Jones from the year 2000, majority opinion written by Justice Antonin Scalia, where he struck down California's required primary legislation because it allowed Democrats to vote in the Republican primary and vice versa. There was an even more recent decision, Matt, in 2011 in Idaho, that had a bill that was very much similar to Representative Reeves' bill. But once again, because it allowed crossover voting, it was stricken as being in violation of the First Amendment.
Crossover voting is currently not permissible in Tennessee, though, right?
It depends on how you answer that question. If you answer it as a legal matter, the answer would be correct because our statutes require that someone be affiliated or subscribe to the tenets of a party to vote in a primary. But the reality is that it's not enforced. And so
I want to read that. Sure. Crossover voting, quote, in a political party's primary without being a bona fide member of or affiliated with that political party is currently against the law in the state of Tennessee.
By statute, it is.
Right.
The problem is that as a practical matter, crossover voting goes on a lot. And I did refer to some statistics on the House floor yesterday. Like, for example, in March of 2024, looking at my home county of Williamson, we had slightly more than 36,000 voters in the presidential preference primary, in the Republican primary. 3,900 of those, or more than 10%, were actually Democrats. That is, they had recently voted in a Democratic primary. And that amount of more than 10% actually exceeded the threshold that the court in Idaho found to be constitutionally significant.
So how do you switch party affiliation under your scenario then? I mean, I've voted Democrat all my life, but I've decided that the Democrats have left me. I don't want to be a Democrat anymore. Are you saying that it should be impermissible for me to decide that I want to join the Republicans and vote in their primary?
Heavens, no. No, the problem is crossover going back and forth. I mean, you at some point, you're obviously entitled to select what party you affiliate
I mean, but
with. How,
based on your statistics, can you not demonstrate that that's, I mean, you don't know, in other words. You have no idea how many of those people that you just cited decided that they would begin voting for Republicans versus how many were, clandestinely voting in the Republican primary as opposed to actually becoming Republican.
in the statistics I just mentioned, no, we don't. But if we were to go back and say, look at the statistics from 2018 or 2020, and then you look at those voters and see where they voted in which primary since then, what you'd be able to demonstrate is that we've got folks crossing over and then going back. So there's not been a bona fide change in political philosophy. There's just an attempt to go over and affect another party's election.
I mean, is there any example in the state of Tennessee of this impacting an election that you can cite?
Oh, sure. One of the statistics I used on the House floor was in 2022 in Williamson County. We had a primary where we had 235 recently voting Democrats in the Republican primary, and yet we had a conservative county commissioner lose a seat by 11 votes. And although obviously we don't know who any particular person votes for, what it appears happened is you had Democrats crossing over, voting in the Republican primary to elect a more moderate Republican primary nominee for the Republican Party, and it worked because that particular conservative county commissioner lost by 11 votes. That is a very recent example just in Williamson County where crossover voting affected who the party's nominee was. And that's why it violates this freedom of association under the First Amendment.
So why wouldn't the answer then be to close the primaries?
That is the answer. And if the bill that we voted on, HB 855, had closed primaries as part of the bill, I would have voted for it. In fact, I think virtually everybody in the Republican caucus would have voted for it. But see, the two have to go together. If we are going to require state and local political parties to use a primary system, we have to give them the means to close the primaries to make sure that only Republicans are voting in the Republican primary.
Well, and there are some, and I would count myself in this number, that would suggest that you're kind of going the wrong direction when you do a caucus-based system, because you're further excluding the voter from the process. And you understand some of those arguments.
Yeah, I've never heard anyone advocate that we should have a caucus.
I mean, I think in Williamson County, there's a group of people that are strongly advocating to move to the caucus system. You wouldn't agree with that?
No, I've not heard that. I mean, I'm familiar with...
I mean, you've never heard of Gary Humble? You don't believe that Gary Humble is behind the Elevate 2025 group?
Well, no, I was thinking...
I mean, I'm just trying to throw it on the table.
No, I understand.
I mean, I just want to make clear that, I mean, everybody knows that there's an effort to move to the caucus system by the local Williamson County Republican Party.
Well, what I have in mind and who I'm referring to are the folks that actually run the party. We've had an excellent chairman for the past several... Are
you suggesting that they have not moved to make a push for a caucus system in Williamson County? That's why this bill exists.
Well...
I mean, Gino, let's not talk around it. Let's talk about it.
I mean, we can talk about it, but I've had discussions with members of the current local party board and with the past party board, and I can tell you, Matt, in my discussions, I've heard from no one who wants to move to a caucus system.
There's no one in leadership in Williamson County, in the leadership of the Republican Party, that you've talked to that wants to move to the caucus system.
Well, I didn't quite finish. That wants to move to a caucus system in lieu of having closed primaries. Everyone recognizes.
Well, let's not talk about the closed primary system. Do you believe that there are people in Williamson County in leadership in the Republican Party that want to move to a caucus system as the circumstances exist today?
No, I do not.
You do not.
I do not.
Yeah, okay.
Not the folks I've spoken to.
No, that's absolutely fair. What else do you have on the docket? I asked you right before we came on air about the behind the budget bills, and you said that you might have a couple of things coming up. What do you got?
We've got a couple of things. We've got one thing called the Valor Act, which is a bill to increase the local property tax exemption that we give to permanently and totally disabled veterans. Mm-hmm. Right now, the exemption is $175,000. It's been that way since 2006, and it's been 20 years since it's been raised. And so I've got a bill to raise that to $250,000. And that's one of the bills that I have that's behind the budget that I'm hoping will come out. I've got a bill that strengthens our unlawful photography law. That's HB 99. That is behind the budget because it would provide for stiffer sentences for those who engage in the surreptitious practice of photographing ladies in various public places. Sure. And I believe that one is going to come out from behind the budget.
Is there a reason why they get behind the budget?
Yes.
It occurs to me that I don't know the answer to that.
Well, because we have a certain amount of revenue, and so we can't pass a bill that's going to have an expense associated with it unless there's revenue to match it. And so until we actually pass a budget, we do not know what revenue is going to be available to fund these bills. And so that's what it means to go behind the budget. The governor gives us a proposed budget, we add to it, and then we pass a budget that has revenue available to fund other bills. But until we pass that tomorrow, we don't know how much revenue there's going to be. That's why they go behind the budget.
You think things will get wrapped up next week?
I do. I think we're definitely on a path to wrapping up next week.
Representative Bulso, always a pleasure to get your perspective on all of these matters, and you're always good to stop by. We appreciate you.
Okay.
That's Representative Gino Bulso.